and how it's tied into some of these things. But also, I do want to get your take on AIG, in as much as you've got that kind of experience. And also, tell us a little bit about Enron. What did you see when you had that critical analysis of Enron's accounting that helped trigger this SEC investigation, which led to their corrupt downfall? What did you see? What were some of the flags there?
Okay, let's do the AIG thing real quick.
Right.
Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on AIG, but it was interesting to me that the government stepped in and bailed that company out the way it did. Now, what's interesting is that the main problem in AIG was out of their London subsidiary, which had been writing credit default insurance and inadvertently, apparently, taking on huge risks. Now, what's interesting about that is that I think a lot of those contracts that they wrote, the debt that AIG was insuring was sovereign and other corporate debt related to Eastern European countries around, the former Soviet Union, that basically the West has been trying to wean away from relationship with Moscow, get them up on their own 2 feet, their own creditworthiness, so that they could finance themselves apart from Russia. And a key element of that was offering debt guarantees that would make it possible for those countries to sell their debt into the public markets. It needed somebody like an AIG behind them to basically offer the mortgage insurance
guarantees, right?
Marketable. So, the other thing about AIG, going back to its original history, formed by Cornelius Starr, selling insurance in China. I mean, the company has always had an aura of kind of spookiness associated with it. In fact, Hank Greenberg, the former CEO, was actually a candidate for Director of Central Intelligence at one point, you might recall. So the company has had a rather symbiotic relationship with the government all along. In fact, I saw Greenberg interviewed by Maria Bartiromo on CNBC one time, about the time of the bailout, and he was saying he didn't quite come to this point. He said, but it's like, sure, the government ought to bail us out. Look at what we've been doing for them for all.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in effect, I think the way the government works, again, we go through what look like normal commercial companies to accomplish geopolitical ends. In this case, propping up the finances of otherwise uncreditworthy countries that we are trying to basically pull out of the Russian orbit, cement them into Europe some way, get them up on their own 2 feet. I think those were the kind of dynamics at work and the thinking in mind with the government in deciding to actually bail out AIG.
And it sounded like the government didn't want the citizens, us,
poking around in the books.
Exactly, to know what was going on, to know what's been going on for a very long time.
Right. Now, I'm not saying this in terms of AIG per se, but as a rule of thumb, the insurance business in general, if you want to launder money, insurance is a good way to do it. The essence of money laundering is a mispriced transaction. It's not carrying around bags of cash. It's large transactions mispriced. That's how you're able to move large amounts of money and get it into a bankable form into somebody's bank account. And there's nothing that's easier to misprice than insurance, generally. The only other thing that's easier to misprice than insurance is oil and gas in the ground, because that's an imaginary figure that you could put almost any kind of a price tag on it. So
that's right, exactly.
That's why the oil and gas business internationally, it's another great way to launder money. You can misprice a deal, and who's to say you're wrong? But you can move large amounts of money one way or another, and who's to call it money laundering?
Did you ever come across a guy by the name of Leo Wanta?
Yes, the famous ambassador to, was it not Austria or something like that? Yeah.
This guy apparently had or was controlling trillions of dollars, and also they say that he helped contribute to the Soviet Union's demise. But apparently this money is still somewhere, I hear.
Who knows? That whole thing was such a mystery. I actually talked to him at one point. This was back in the...
So he's a real guy.
Well, he's a live being, but he could be Joe the Plumber for all I know. It's such a bizarre story that as a journalist, you just couldn't go there. You just couldn't write about this guy credibly. It was just too strange. And but I think the spook world love these kind of people. They have no credibility. They have no plausibility. The stories could be completely true, but who in their right mind could write about them?
They're so bizarre.
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, and
well, how did you stumble across him? What had you heard?
Well, there's my life has been a little strange too. Yeah.
You're one of the few people who knows about this guy.
I know. Look, before I went to work at Plaza, I was working at Forbes magazine. I was a senior writer there, and there I stumbled into this incredible story about bank spying efforts by the U.S. government. And it actually was in connection with some work I was doing on the Inslaw case. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah, I sure do.
This case where the government purloined some useful software, which they then modified, and it was part of the allegations. So this promise, this was originally a prosecutor's management software, but it was adaptable. They put it into banking software so you could keep track of banking transactions. And what's interesting about this is one of the prime contractors for the National Security Agency to basically get this stuff customized and planted into foreign money center banks was this Arkansas company called Systematics, later acquired by Altel. Now, Systematics, very spooky company. Guess who was an attorney of record for Systematics? Hillary Clinton. Working at the Rose Law Firm under the auspices of Vince Foster, who I come to find out he had a long relationship with the National Security Agency and was kind of the handler on behalf of Jackson Stevens, the owner of Systematics, in all of this stuff. And what got really weird is, in looking at this, I came to find out that at the time he died, Vince Foster was actually under counterintelligence surveillance. He was suspected of selling secrets, and he would have actually been in a position where he would have had access to all kinds of critical code, encryption stuff in the White House. That's why if you look at the Senate Banking Committee records on that, there's whole pages and pages of blacked out, redacted testimony from all the people around. The bizarre stuff about military intelligence teams sweeping his office immediately after he died, basically vacuuming up all the documents out of his office. And the government just went into overdrive to try and convince the world it was just a routine suicide. Move along, folks. There's nothing to look at here. Well, in fact, Foster, I'm told, had actually been under suspicion of selling secrets. To whom? The Chinese, for one, because they were out there ready market. They were buying this stuff up like mad. And it was at a time when, the Clinton crowd probably had large amounts of unpaid off-the-books expenses from the original, the first election in '92. I think Vince was probably part of the team that was trying to pay off anything that isn't nailed down. This, I believe, is the reason Bill Clinton was impeached. It was probably part of the team that was trying to pay off some of those debts. And where you go wherever you can, and you sell anything that isn't nailed down. This, I believe, is the reason Bill Clinton was impeached. It had nothing to do with Whitewater. It had nothing to do with Monica Lewinsky. The problem was there was a whole heap of national security problems on his watch. I mean, the Chinese were throwing money at the Clinton crowd left and right. They had scores of front men, bag men, from, Charlie Tree to Gina Norrell Lum. You had John Wang getting CIA briefings at the Commerce Department. It was a disaster. In fact, that's why I think at the end of toward the end of, about the time he was being impeached, that's when he had the sea change in U.S. policy toward China. Under Clinton, and actually under George H.W. Bush, we had basically maintained an attitude of let's be nice to these guys, we'll all get along, they'll behave, we can all coexist, blah, blah, blah.
We'll even help them with technology.
We got a most favored nation status. Bush 1 got a most favored nation status. Clinton renewed it twice. But by the end of the 90s, it was clear the Chinese, it's just the nature of things. They're going to extend geopolitical dominance if they can. And they're going to lie, cheat, and steal on their trade agreements. I mean, they're basically pursuing a brutally classic mercantilist trade strategy. The beggar thy neighbor, snarf up as much hard currency as they can, build up their military might, and some